outside the Broward Government Center that houses the headquarters for the Broward County Supervisor of Elections. I have a number of announcements to make today, including on the latest developments on our lawsuit against the Broward Supervisor of Elections, a lawsuit that led to the illegal destruction of all the paper ballots in our August 2016 Democratic primary against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Before I make any announcements, I'd like to thank all of my supporters, those who are here today, and those who are watching. Our campaign has relied 100% on small donations from ordinary people of limited means, like you and me, who have gone online to donate at canova.com. In 2016, we received more than 209,000 individual donations and broke all records for the highest percentage of small online donations of any federal election in history. It's for all of you who are contributing so generously to this campaign that I felt a responsibility to pursue this public records request to inspect the ballots of our 2016 election. And for the thousands who have volunteered their time, walked door to door, made phone calls, and shared on social media, who are giving us aid and comfort, love and support every day, I feel a responsibility to all those who collectively have contributed to this campaign to seek answers in this ballot destruction. The illegal destruction of ballots was a blow not just to me, but to all of us. Even the appearance that these ballots were destroyed to cover up election rigging is a harm not just to me, but a harm to all of you as well. It's an injury to our election system. It undermines our faith and confidence in its integrity, and not just in Florida, but across the country. The holes in our election system that allowed this to happen exist in every corner of this nation. And 2016 showed egregious manipulation of primary after primary in our Democratic Party. And sadly, not at the hands of the Russians or other foreigners, but Democrats against Democrats. We saw this in the Democratic presidential primaries and caucuses, election irregularities, they call them, while Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. And to call these irregularities is an understatement. These were intentional acts that deprived untold number of voters, untold number of Americans, either their right to vote or their right to have their ballots counted. These failures go to the very heart of what it means to live in a democracy and to lose our democracy. When we look the other way, when we let the authorities sweep these scandals under the rug, we create a moral hazard. We create incentives for the authorities to continue rigging our elections. One example, last October, the New York City Board of Elections admitted in a civil consent decree that it had purged over 200,000 citizens from its voting rolls in the days leading up to its primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And they promised in that consent decree to not do it again. No fine, no criminal prosecutions. Perhaps the FBI has been too busy chasing Russian phantoms to investigate this kind of criminal wrongdoing. There have been no repercussions. This is like a Wall Street consent decree. No personal liability, accountability, or consequences for defrauding the public and depriving citizens of their most sacred rights. That's why we started a petition to demand that the Justice Department, the New York Attorney General, and the Department of Homeland Security investigate and bring criminal prosecutions. You can find that petition online at canova.com. The harm done in New York was not just to Bernie Sanders. It was to all of us who were contributing to his campaign in so many ways, big and small. Likewise, my lawsuit to inspect the ballots is not just my fight, it's your fight too. If we cannot verify the vote here in Blue Broward County in a race against a party insider, if there's no transparency in an election of a disgraced party leader, then we are living at the mercy of corrupt forces in our society. I did not rush to bring this lawsuit. When our primary ended, we all had a sinking feeling about the results. At the height of our campaign in 2016, we were knocking on 10 to 12,000 doors a week. For one shining moment, the political revolution ran through South Florida and ran through the 23rd Congressional District. We had 4 field offices in every corner of the district, and we were engaging thousands of voters a week on their doorsteps, in their living rooms, and on the phone. We had the most impressive field operation of any congressional campaign in the country, bar none, with more than 50 full-time organizers and deputy field organizers and hundreds of volunteers. We ranked likely voters and entered the information in the VAN voter database, and then often followed up with more engagements at their doorsteps and on the phone. Our internal numbers showed a far, far different result than the official outcome. We considered our numbers to be reliable, more reliable than the few public opinion polls that were based on 400, 500, 600 phone calls to those who have landlines. How many people here have landlines? Not too many. Many of us were skeptical of the outcome, and so were a number of well-respected election experts who analyzed the results. Although I never conceded defeat to Wasserman Schultz, I was dissuaded from formally challenging the results within the 10 days required under Florida law, and I consider this to be my biggest mistake as a candidate. It was the only time I can remember bending to the views of political consultants, most of whom would abandon our campaign soon after the 10-day challenge period had expired. In the days that followed, the concerns of election integrity experts reached a crescendo, and I subsequently moved forward with the first of our 3 public records requests to the Broward Supervisor of Elections in November of 2016. What followed, in a nutshell, was half a year of stonewalling by the Supervisor of Elections, and then I filed a lawsuit last June of 2017. While this lawsuit was pending, the Supervisor of Elections ordered the destruction of the ballots, and they were indeed destroyed in violation of federal law. I am told by election experts, without the paper ballots, the digital scanned images are probably worthless, that they can be easily manipulated, easily altered by software manipulation. It's why we need, in this country, 100% paper ballots counted by hand in public, reported immediately at the local precinct level, as we did for 200 years in this country. We just had a $1.5 trillion tax cut. This richest government on the face of the earth has the resources to take care of big corporations. It should have the resources to spend a few $1 billion on election night to pay ordinary Americans to count ballots by hand to make sure we have transparent and verifiable elections. We should not have to depend on any electronic computer audits whatsoever. This is how it's done throughout Western Europe. This is how it should be done here. This lawsuit has taken a huge toll on my campaign and me personally. It has sucked up resources, valuable time, and my attention and that of my campaign staff. I was attacked by the establishment and by mainstream media for pursuing this lawsuit, and some of my supporters even thought it was a waste of time. I poured over $20,000 of my own meager savings into keeping this lawsuit and this campaign alive, and thousands of you, my supporters, contributed small donations to keep our campaign and this lawsuit alive. You know, I was interviewed recently by a burner group, and they said every time they interview someone, they ask that person to select a song that they play. I almost selected Tied to the Whipping Post, because that is how it has felt this past year. But I ended up choosing Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down, and that is the campaign's theme. You can stand us up at the gates of hell, and we will not back down. We did not back down from this lawsuit, and our hard work is paying off. We recently conducted depositions of Dr. Brenda Snipes, the Supervisor of Elections, and 3 of her top employees, and I can announce a number of developments. First, Dr. Snipes admitted to destroying the ballots in violation of federal law. She lamely claimed it was all a mistake. She also admitted to signing a destruction order certifying that the ballots were not the subject of any pending litigation, which she would have known to be a falsehood. She lamely claimed that she did not read what she was signing. We have more of this online. Go to timcanova.com and you can read about this ballot destruction. Our pretrial discovery also revealed some ties between Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the supervisor's office. She seemed to be attached shoulder to shoulder with the supervisor's aide who actually destroyed the ballots. He had not one, but two framed photographs of himself with one politician, no other politician but Debbie Wasserman Schultz, on the shelf in his office. And the supervisor's own attorney offered to the court to supply them with an affidavit by Debbie Wasserman Schultz to try to stop this litigation. The court refused that offer. This is a case that we intend to win. We intend to win. Our lawyers have filed a motion for summary judgment. We're awaiting a hearing at the end of this month. But our civil case is not the end. It is the beginning of our efforts to root out corruption in our election system. I have written to Ken Detzner, the Florida Secretary of State, the highest election official in the state of Florida, demanding a full investigation of the actions of the Broward Supervisor of Elections in the destruction of our ballots. I have also written to hundreds of elected officials, candidates for public office, and party officials from both Democratic and Republican parties in Broward, Miami-Dade, and throughout the state, calling on them to demand an investigation. You can see those letters at timcanova.com. The silence among these Democrats has been deafening, but it has not been surprising. I have watched as my party has come to resemble a battered spousal relationship. The party regularly ignores its grassroots base, and it abuses those like me who challenge party incumbents. The party beats us up, robs us, violates our trust, lies, cheats, and steals, and then it says, you've got nowhere to go. It's the Republicans or us. Now I'm facing the prospect of another closed Democratic primary, again administered by the same supervisor of elections who destroyed all the paper ballots in our last campaign. This is an intolerable situation. It would reward all of their stonewalling. The Broward Democratic Party is also just fine with this. It's just fine with having Democratic incumbents avoid debates and other candidate forums. It's fine with excluding challengers like me from speaking at Democratic committee, club, and caucus meetings. It's fine with incumbents financed by corporate interests indulging in the politics of fear and smear against progressive challengers. And it's fine with openly supporting Debbie Wasserman Schultz in violation of the party's own neutrality rules and promises. While the leadership of the Broward Democratic Party has its head up its ass, an entire generation is coming of age politically. A generation far more progressive and critical of the corrupt status quo. I'm talking about the Gen Xers, the Millennials, the Centennials, all part of what has been called recently the school shooting generation. I've seen their activism for years and their commitment at Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Los Angeles, Occupy Fort Lauderdale and Miami, at the anti-Trans-Pacific Partnership protest, at the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock, at the protests against the Sable Trail Pipeline here in the state of Florida. And of course, we saw their activism in the Bernie Sanders campaign. The estimates are now that upwards of 60 to 70% of them are not affiliated with any political party. They are independent because they have had enough with the lies, the hypocrisy, and the corruption of both major parties. Enough is enough, they say. I have also had enough of the constant rigging of elections in the Democratic Party, and particularly in closed primaries that stack the decks for incumbents who cater to huge corporate interests. This is the United States of America. We are born free. That is our birthright. We do not exist to serve the government or a political party and their corporate interests. The parties, the government, and the corporations they charter in our name are supposed to serve we the people. Today, I'm making my own declaration of independence. I will be changing my party registration to non-party affiliation. I intend to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz as an independent. I will be on the ballot in November against Wasserman Schultz and any candidate nominated by the Republicans. We will be engaging with all the voters: Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, Libertarians, Vegetarians, Pescatarians, Rotarians, Kiwanis, Millennials, Gen Xers, Baby Boomers, retirees, military veterans, students, homeowners, renters, and the homeless. All those living on the rough edges of our society. We will not be constrained by the narrow range of acceptable opinion in the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. When we see bullshit, we will call it out. Our campaign has always been about speaking truth to power, preaching truth to the powerless, and giving voice to the people. People power, when awakened and armed with the truth, those are the weapons against a soulless corporate political machine and their corporate-owned mass media. As an independent, I now reaffirm why we are running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. First, she has failed to represent the people of her district. She has followed the corporate agenda of her donors, big Wall Street banks and predatory payday lenders, private prison companies, big pharma, big alcohol, big sugar, and the fossil fuels industry, among others. Our campaign is focused on the people of this district and the people across this country who are hungering for a new deal. We have had enough of trickle-down economics. The stock market is doing fine. The asset markets are inflated. But for most people, this is year 10 of an economic depression. I know what the official unemployment rate says. It says something like 4%. The official unemployment rate is low because nobody can afford to leave their crappy jobs for another job. Because so many people with advanced degrees are driving Uber for a living. We have a crisis in this country of jobs and income for ordinary Americans. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I was in love with him once, in 2008. Si se puede. I was dreaming about him during that campaign. But I make no pretense that I believe the President Obama, failed to push a jobs-first agenda in 2009 and 2010. He surrounded himself with Wall Street economists, but by the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. 2010 was a bloodbath for Democrats. Our agenda is all about jobs first. Go to timcanova.com and read our agenda. Read our issue statements. We have a crisis of jobs and income in this country. For 18 to 34-year-olds, they're more likely to be living at home with their parents. That's how bad it is. For baby boomers, in a similar crisis. The suicide rates among everybody is going up. But particularly, this is a crisis among men. Boys, teenagers, young men, and baby boomers. Suicide rates, opioid epidemics, people self-medicating for pain and depression. It's a crisis among young girls too. Young girls, I recommend the video. Hot Girls Want It. It shows how the sex trade, the trafficking, human trafficking is right here in this district and in South Florida. Young girls being lured from all over this country. So we have a cultural crisis, an unemployment crisis. It's led to a lot of the shootings that we see, whether it's in poor neighborhoods or in the schools. We need gun safety legislation, but we also need to enforce existing gun laws, and we need to address a culture that glorifies violence. We need a new deal centered around a jobs program. More teachers, better paid teachers, smaller class sizes, a civilian conservation corps, a sea conservation corps. We need to follow the example of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, a works projects administration that rebuilds the crumbling infrastructure and puts people to work, even writers, musicians, and artists. We need a federal jobs guarantee with support for a basic income for all Americans. My dad was a dreamer. came to this country as a 2-year-old on a boat from Europe. He was part of an extended immigrant family, and he served this country in World War II. He was part of the greatest generation. He and the rest of that generation benefited by the GI Bill of Rights. Martin Luther King Jr., in 2 days, on April 4th, it will be 50 years since his assassination. His final couple of years, Martin Luther King was calling for a GI Bill of Rights that would uplift not just blacks, but every person of every race. It was long overdue when he called for this in 1968. It's long overdue today. King said this: in our society, it's murder psychologically to deprive a man of a job or an income. You're in substance saying to that man that he has no right to exist. You are in a real way depriving him of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, denying, in his case, the very creed of his society. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not for some, but for all. That's the creed found in our Declaration of Independence. It's our campaign slogan. It's the name of our community advocacy group, Progress for All. Not progress for some. It's not progressive if it's not progress for all. That's what Debbie Wasserman Schultz has forgotten. We need Medicare for all, not Medicare for some. We need jobs for all and great public schools. We don't need more private prisons like the private immigration detention center she pushed for Southwest ranches in our own district. We must end the drug war, end the system of mass incarceration that's now become the new Jim Crow. We must pursue racial justice, equality of races and gender and sexual orientation. As King said, we should be focused on the content of one's character, not on these arbitrary categories. And we must protect the environment. We must move beyond fracking and pipelines, convert to solar and wind, tidal energy, wave energy, and how to pay for all of this. I've had years of study and activism as a law professor working on financial issues, studying the Federal Reserve, public banking, infrastructure banking. That's why in 2011, Senator Bernie Sanders put me on an advisory committee to reform the Federal Reserve. That's what we need in this country. We need the Federal Reserve to have a program for Main Street the way it did for Wall Street, and we need a national infrastructure bank. To my modern money theory friends out there, I see you and I'm with you. This is New Deal economics. Goes back to Abba Lerner and functional finance. There does not need to be any fiscal constraints, any financial constraints on an active fiscal policy. And finally, we need an agenda for peace. In 2008, candidate Barack Obama said he didn't want to just end the war in Iraq. He wanted to end the mindset that led us into the war in Iraq. On this count, we have fallen sadly short. What is that mindset that led us into the war in Iraq? It is a mindset that is okay to engage in wars of regime change. I have opposed every war of regime change in the Middle East. Iraq, Libya, Syria. It is a mindset that has gone to war based on politicized intelligence and lies. Lies that are repeated by a captured corporate media, who then vilify any critics as conspiracy theorists or foreign puppets. We have failed to learn the lessons not just of Iraq, but of the Vietnam War itself, where we were led into war by a mountain of lies. So what do we have? We have perpetual war where it seems like we're arming all sides of every war. Eisenhower warned about this. And that was the nature of my criticism 2 years ago of the Iran agreement. It's great that the Iran agreement prevents any military action against Iran's nuclear facilities. That's a great outcome, and I support the full implementation of that Iran agreement. I want to be clear, though, what my criticism was about. That the Iran agreement would fuel a regional war when coupled with $100 billion arms sales to the Saudis. And we've seen an out-of-control arms race between Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia, and proxy wars in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere in the region. What we need is not just an arms agreement with one country in the region, but an international arms control agenda enforced not by sanctions against Mideast countries, but sanctions against arms dealers and the nations that charter them. As many of you know, the 23rd Congressional District is a rather Jewish district. It has the highest number of Holocaust survivors of any district in the country. Like Bernie Sanders, I was once a kibbutz volunteer. I have lived and worked and traveled around Israel many times. I have backpacked around Egypt, armed with only a sleeping bag. I support a Jewish state in Israel. I also support a democratic Palestine state, living in peace with Israel. How do we get there? I've got plenty of ideas to be discussed later. But today, for now, I want to say how shocked and saddened I am by Israel's recent use of disproportionate force against Palestinians in Gaza near the border. They should not have been firing live rounds. Instead of tear gas, maybe water cannons. This is a part of the world where bullets are less dear than water. Insanity is said to be doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. Firing live rounds is doing the same thing over again. Firing tear gas and live rounds. They should be perhaps firing canisters filled with marijuana smoke. I don't know. But they need to be doing something different. Each side in this conflict, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has to acknowledge each other's common humanity. Israel, along with the Palestinian Authority and the Egyptians, have worked together to defeat Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is failing in Gaza, but the bloodshed that we saw last week over Passover has done much and could do much to undermine Israel's position. It cannot be good for the long-term interests of the Israeli people who I care so much about. And I say this as a strong supporter of the democratic Jewish state of Israel. On issue after issue, we're offering the voters a choice between a corporate robot politician and a people's agenda. The top issue of this election must be election integrity and campaign finance reform. That's why we are holding this event right here outside the Broward Supervisor of Elections. Without election integrity, we will not be able to achieve success on all the other issues. Let me be clear, our campaign is closer to the Democratic Party's own platform and the party's New Deal tradition than is Debbie Wasserman Schultz's campaign. Even as independents, we are the real Democrats in this race. Last fall, I was a delegate to the Florida Democratic Party's convention that overwhelmingly adopted a series of progressive resolutions that we had championed. To tax large corporations and close loopholes on Wall Street banks. To oppose taxpayer subsidies for charter schools. To oppose for-profit private prisons. To oppose all forms of fracking and oppose the construction of the Sable Trail pipeline. To support solar development. To demand the automatic restoration of voting rights to Floridians with felony convictions after they've completed all the terms of their sentences. Supporting automatic voter registration at age 18 and a national voting holiday. To support campaign finance reform by enacting fair and public financing of elections while encouraging the development of small contribution political fundraising. Demanding that politicians, public officials, be prohibited from working as lobbyists upon leaving office, and supporting comprehensive immigration reform that provides a pathway to citizenship for undocumented neighbors, that takes care of our dreamers, we see you, and that provides a shelter to refugees fleeing war, persecution, and natural disasters. We also have to stop the funding of wars that are creating this refugee crisis all over the world. These resolutions that were adopted by the Florida Party demand health care as a guaranteed right of all Americans, oppose defunding and privatization of the Veterans Affairs system, and support policies that distribute resources to addiction treatment, prevention, and recovery programs aimed at addressing the opioid and other drug addictions. We were out front on these issues. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been silent at best and often part of the problem on these issues. You can find our stance on these issues at canova.com. These are not small policy statements. I'm a law professor. I've done all but put footnotes in our policy statements. Go to timcanova.com to the issues page. So make no mistake, I repeat, even as we run as an independent, we are the better Democrat. I did not leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has left us. I am not screwing the Democratic Party. It has screwed over too many ordinary Americans, and it has screwed over too many progressive candidates. But we're not just running for the people of Florida's 23rd Congressional District. I'm constantly hearing from people all across the state of Florida complaining about the Democratic Party establishment standing in the way of progressive candidates, even in districts controlled by Republicans and without any Democratic establishment candidates. And so many fellow Democrats have reached out to me to tell me that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the one pulling the strings behind the scenes here in Florida. And that's why those progressives around the state of Florida are pulling for all of us. We see you, we hear you, and we will help. First, let me be clear. I will be endorsing progressive Democratic candidates in Democratic primaries in Florida and across the country. I can and will campaign for progressives and candidates with integrity, including many running as Democrats. Debbie Wasserman Schultz cannot and will not be campaigning publicly for a lot of these folks because she is the kiss of death. She is the albatross around this party. Look what she did for Hillary Clinton. She might help run up a voting count in Broward County, but around the rest of Florida, Debbie Wasserman Schultz helped lose the state for Hillary Clinton. Debbie Wasserman Schultz will be forever dogged by her corruption and scandal, from rigging the 2016 primaries to her recent scandal that the mainstream press papers over, including the Sun Sentinel. I'm talking about the Imran Awan IT scandal on Capitol Hill. According to a House Inspector General report recently released, 44 House Democrats were allowed to waive background checks for Imran Awan and his crew, based apparently on Debbie Wasserman Schultz vouching for them. She cannot help herself, she cannot help Democrats, she can only help her corporate interests. Second, I will be traveling to Tallahassee in early May to file as an independent. And we will be meeting with progressive candidates and grassroots activists in Tallahassee, Gainesville, Orlando, Tampa, Sarasota, and Fort Myers. And then later, a few weeks down the road, we will take a tour of the eastern part of Florida, from Jacksonville and St. Augustine to our friends in Broward County, where there's Canova Beach, to Stewart, and south to the Florida Keys. Again, Debbie Wasserman Schultz cannot be seen in these places. She will lose the party votes. We will be campaigning for independents and for Democrats and progressives all over the state. Finally, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is not just a menace to the state of Florida. She's a menace at the national level and the international level. She is more responsible than almost anyone else for Democratic Party losses. Think about it. In the last decade, the Democratic Party has lost over 1,000 legislative seats. The Democratic Party is now in the weakest position it's been in the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, state legislatures, governorships in 98 years, since 1920. And to make matters worse, they've lost the White House to Donald Trump. In a strategy that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was a big part of, and the WikiLeaks memos have shown this. It led to her disgrace. That the party was pushing 3 Pied Piper candidates: Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump. Donald Trump got, by many estimates, a Harvard study, over $5 billion of free airtime. That's not the Russians. That is the establishment, mainstream media, and the establishment of the Democratic Party trying to get the candidate that they thought they could beat. And now we've got Donald Trump in the White House and a Republican House and Senate and Republican power all over this country. And how did she cover up for this? Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the first person, to claim that the DNC was hacked. Was the DNC hacked? James Comey, the FBI director, when he testified on Capitol Hill, was asked, "Did you inspect the DNC servers?" James Comey said 3 times the FBI requested to inspect those servers, and 3 times they were denied. Did he follow up with a subpoena? Did he seize the servers? No. The FBI and the U.S. intelligence community relied upon the purported findings of CrowdStrike, a private internet security firm hired by Debbie Wasserman Schultz at the DNC and headed by an anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian businessman. And again, we're told to trust authority, not to ask questions. Why has Congress not investigated this? Why have there not been hearings? Why has CrowdStrike not been brought up and asked these questions? Why have the DNC servers still not been inspected? I'll tell you why. Members of Congress are too busy spending 30 hours a week dialing for dollars to their rich donors. They don't hold hearings anymore. It's rare for them to do investigations. Instead, the American people are told to rely and trust authority. The kind of trust in authority that we saw failed so miserably in the war in Iraq, and we're being led into a new Cold War and being told to trust authority again. And as a result, we have seen a disgusting McCarthyism tactics at home by both Democrats and Republicans. You know, there was a House staff report last month charging that the Kremlin has co-opted the environmental movement in this country. Talk about conspiracy theories. They cited me in this House staff report. Why was I cited? Because one purported Russian bot somewhere retweeted one of my tweets. I had tweeted praise for the Miami-Dade Commission for passing a resolution to ban fracking. One tweet, and somehow that's evidence that I've been co-opted by the Kremlin. This is bullshit. This is McCarthyism, and we've got to call it out. You know, the Vietnam War, the lies that led us into Vietnam were revealed by Daniel Ellsberg. Today, Daniel Ellsberg would probably be called a Soviet agent the way Julian Assange is. Democrats used to praise Julian Assange when he was revealing the crimes of George W. Bush in Iraq. This is an attack on journalism, on independent journalism, and shame on us if this neo-McCarthyism and new Cold War is based on lies. And this is not just my opinion. There is a group called Veterans of Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, V-I-P-S. It consists of people who have devoted their entire professional lives, their careers, to U.S. intelligence agencies at the highest technical levels, at the CIA and the NSA. And they have studied the megadata, and they have come out with much different findings that the DNC was not having, that this was a leak. There must be congressional investigations of this. Enough of blindly accepting authority. From the Gulf of Tonkin and Vietnam to Iraq weapons of mass destruction, have we learned nothing? We ask questions and demand answers based on real evidence. The establishment is peddling in conspiracy narratives reinforced by their corporate media, and then they expect and demand blind allegiance by the American people. We must not be afraid to exercise our independent thought, to think for ourselves and to think anew. For our independence, we're attacked by the corporate media with smears. The social media giants are now using algorithms to censor our speech and our reach, but we will not back down. I am continually inspired by this young generation. They want real discussion and debates and solutions on the issues. By running as an independent, we will have those discussions and engage those voters on the issues. And we will remember that we are fighting. We are fighting to restore democracy, and we are fighting for progress for all. In the past 2 years, we have suffered heartbreaking losses. Our hearts were broken witnessing all the election fraud and rigging and the sorry state of our democracy. Our hearts were broken, but we are now stronger in the broken places. These times require change, revolutionary change, a peaceful political revolution. Not a communist revolution, not a neoliberal capitalist revolution, but a revolution of integrity. And it starts with integrity in our elections and our politics. It starts with speaking truth to power. Once again, the political revolution runs through South Florida. Once again, it runs through Florida's 23rd congressional district. It's been said that the only solutions for the ills of democracy is more democracy. We need more transparency. We need confidence that the truth shall drive out all the lies of this corrupt oligarchy. A positive, constructive change will not happen without great effort. It requires each of us to change, to be better human beings every day, to do better as a people, to live up to our creed, the land of the free and the home of the brave. We must act as free people. We must act as brave people. It requires commitment, it requires sacrifice, and it requires courage for each of us. When I first turned my life upside down in 2016 to run against the corrupt head of the DNC, I pledged to give every measure of my mind and spirit to the cause. I promised my blood, sweat, and tears. I now, today, pledge to you my life, my fortunes, and my sacred honor. I pledge to you when elected, I will be owned by you, the American people, the people of Florida, and the people of my congressional district. Please go to timcanova.com and help in every way you can. Contribute every last dollar that you can afford. Spread the word far and wide on social media and in your face-to-face interactions on a daily basis with your friends and loved ones, and even those you don't agree with. People power, when organized and inspired, can defeat corporate power. Please give me your voices, your hearts, and your faith in our grassroots campaign. I humbly ask your help at this critical hour. It is time for all of us to put our country ahead of politics, our party, our people ahead of party. And remember, we won't back down. We will keep fighting for progress for all. We will keep fighting to restore our democracy and keep the faith. Thank you.